Hi, you've tuned into Truth Before Reconciliation, produced by CKUW 95.9 FM here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Treaty 1 territory. I'm Tammy Wolf, the host. I'm here with David Robertson. He is an author of multiple books, as well as an award winner. And he's going to come and talk to us a little bit about some of the books that he's authored. So welcome, David. I'm really happy and excited to have you. I think we have lots to talk about.
Thanks for having me.
So I thought maybe we would give you an opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself for the listeners, and then maybe we'll move into just getting right into your journey as how you became an author and what that looks like.
Sure, yeah. Well, so my name is Dave. You can call me David. I spent most of my life in Winnipeg since I was just a little boy, about 2 or 3 years old. So it's a city that I think, while it has its share of issues, it's also,
Right.
I think it's a really underrated city. There's a lot of really beautiful things about it. I feel like I have a lot of homes. You know, where my mom grew up in Melita, feels like a home to me. And where my dad grew up in Norway House is a home to me as well. Yeah, I always think about the first time I went to Norway House. I was just about 22 or so, and the lasting memory I have of what I think embodies the spirit of that community is we were walking to the chief and council office with the chief at the time. This was about 2001 or 2001, and I mentioned that I was cold, that I felt cold. And we were walking with the chief, and he instantly took his jacket off his back and put it on me. And that was, I feel like that's like a really good example of what it's, what like life is like up there. Because a lot of people have like these, I think, false perceptions of what life is like on reserve. And I've always told people, you got to go there, and see for yourself, because there's a lot of things probably that you don't expect or know about it. Anyway, so that's a big part of who I am as well. I'm really proud to be a band member of Norway House. And I am an author, so I've written about 30 books in my career. I think that the notable thing about that is most of those books are for children. So the big focus of my work is for kids, and that's because kids are the ones who are going to be the change makers. And right. I think that as adults, the best thing that we can do is prepare them to do the work, because yes. we have unfairly left them with a lot on their shoulders. And so the best that we can do is make sure that they're more prepared than we were, in the past, and that they make better decisions for us and for, future generations. And beyond that, I'm a father of 5 too. So being a dad is a big part of my life. And I have 3 girls. So, that I think a lot about community. I think a lot about, the importance of being able to live in a good community, which I think we have to recognize in Canada. Not everybody has that benefit. And the safety of people who live in communities. I think a lot about that too, especially having 3 Indigenous girls. That's something that I think a lot about. And I try to, anything that I do is to try to contribute in some way, so whether it's, my public speaking, writing, or, running this imprint I'm running at Penguin Random House. It's all focused on representation, reconciliation, and moving forward. Right. So that's just a little bit about me.
I definitely feel, first and foremost, I want to say shout out Norway House Cree Nation. Both of us proud band members of that community. And then as well as shout out to rural Manitoba, Melita. Yes.
Melita, yeah.
So I don't know if I've been, I think I might have passed through, not sure, but I'm also very familiar with rural Manitoba. I've kind of been like all over the map. So I see you. As Manitobans with like calling different places home, and also Winnipeg. I feel like your organic story hasn't come out yet. So what I'm really interested in hearing about, because you've said over 30 books.
I think it's about 30 books right now. Yeah.
Yeah. So like how did this come about? Like when did you start writing? Was this something that I know you talked about connection to youth and these books? I do have a few of these books here, which we'll get into specifically in a bit here, but you talked about your books being for youth. So was this something that you were drawn to as a youth yourself?
It was more what I didn't have as a youth,
Right.
so I feel like my career as a writer and what I focus on is this like confluence of experiences and exposure or lack of exposure, and interests. And
Mhm.
so I wanted to be a writer since I was very young. Ever since I was in grade 3, I have a very
Right.
clear memory of telling my mom that I wanted to be a writer when I grew up. And it was after I
Mm.
wrote a bunch of poetry for my grade 3 class. My teacher saw some talent, I guess, and made a book out of my poetry, and it made me feel like I could make books. And so I told my mom I wanted to make books. And I think like the journey for me as a writer has been figuring out what that focus was going to be, what kind of books I was going to write. I think that you need that as a writer. You need to have an idea of what's your message. I think that beyond just like telling a story, it's also like, what good does that story do? Like, what is the value in it? What are you trying to accomplish through it? And for me, I grew up without stories that I needed. I grew up without stories about Indigenous people, at least Indigenous people that were accurately represented, and truthfully represented. That was something that was really lacking for me.
Right.
Or there was a complete absence of
Absolutely. Yeah.
us in literature, and that wasn't. I think as a kid, as a Cree kid, when you read books where they're all white characters, you just think, what's my value here? Like, what, like,
Right.
am I not worth writing about? Is it like, so when I started to think about actively trying to get published, it was, for me, it was, what can I do to make sure that kids have books that I didn't have?
Mhm.
And and
Right.
um and so I've tried to, in my career, fill gaps, I guess fill gaps that um need to be filled. And the
Right.
question I ask myself is always, it has this been done before? And
Right.
if it hasn't been done, then can I do it? And if I can do it, then my attitude has always been, then I ought to do it.
Right.
Because I can't wait for someone else to do something that I know that I can do. And that's, so my decisions about the stories I write, and writing in general, has been what needs to be out there. And there's a lot that we haven't done that needs to be done. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think I can
Definitely.
do some of it. So that's why I've written books, is to try and do the work.
I feel like when I think about because I have lots of guests on my show, and then I also I talk about my own story too, and I always think about that, right? Because as Indigenous people, we're helpers, right? That's what we want to give back. We want to, and you're talking about tying this, I guess, lack of representation. So we're kind of seeing a surge now, and I always think about reading the book April Raintree when I was 12 years old. And that book is still like my very favorite book of all time. Why? Representation. Because
Yeah.
I saw myself in that character, and again, like full circle. My daughter's 14, she's in grade 9. I recommended that book to her to read as one of her book reports. And she gravitated to it, right? And the fact being that even as a 14-year-old girl, she's like, yeah, her parents went to residential school, and that's still relevant today. And mom, that book is as old as you. That's old, but it's still relevant. And the fact that I taught that
Yeah.
in my class. And so when I hear you talking about representation and creating these books for youth, that's what it is. This gravitational pull for these, Indigenous youth. And then on top of it, like these are graphic novels. So let's talk a little bit about why you chose graphic novels, and maybe for the listeners who don't know what a graphic novel is, give them a little bit of insight.
Well, a graphic novel is a comic. It's like a longer form comic. Comics are typically, you're going to be between 18 to 22 pages, something like that. A graphic novel is usually, the differences between the two is that a graphic novel is a complete story. Comic books are usually serialized, and graphic novels are typically longer than comics. And other than that, if you look inside both of them, they're gonna look the same. So so when I kind of use the terms interchangeably. There are differences between the two of them, but the main differences are in like length and I guess in structure, in that they're either serialized or complete stories.
Right.
My decision to start my career writing comics was, I guess, twofold. One of them was looking at what did the most damage when I was growing up.
Right.
And comics were, historically, comics in their representation or their appropriation was really bad.
Right.
So I do a lot of talk on appropriation, and every single superhero almost has worn a headdress at some point historically. Superman and Batman and Robin and Rex the Wonder Dog, and they've all put on headdresses. So appropriation is something that's happened a lot in the world of comics and in popular culture. And then with the representation of Indigenous people in comics, it's always been really poor, and it's always been very stereotypical. And so Tom King actually breaks down the representation of Indigenous people in pop culture really well in Comedian Indian. And so like the dead Indian, the dying Indian, I guess, the noble savage, the savage Indian, those are very common tropes that the comic book world has utilized for a long time.
For sure.
And so I wanted to undo that. I think like what I wanted to do was fight fire with fire. So I thought that I might as well write comics because they were so bad in terms of how they represented us. Like, so let's put out good ones, and so that was my whole attitude. And then the other thing is, when you think about the ways in which we tell stories and the ways in which we communicate, comic books are a relatively newer form of literature at the surface level. So like the first comic book came out in the early 19th century. It was about 1830s, something like that. But the comics are really a form of sequential art. So sequential art, art in sequence that tells a story. That's an old form of communication. So it's actually probably the oldest form of communication. Before we had words, we spoke in pictures, and we did it with sequenced pictures. And so comics are actually the oldest form of communication, and that speaks to something like within us. There's something within us that connects to that, because we're visual learners. And so so I feel like all of those reasons are why I chose to do comics. And I think that the overarching thing with that is I wanted to write books that would educate. And so I felt like the best tool to educate would be a comic book. And it's turned out that it has been, like a lot of comics, especially over the last 10 years, have been used more and more in classrooms. And my comics, from my first comic, which is 7 Generations, to the newest comic, they're used in a lot of schools, and stocked in a lot of libraries. 7 Generations, which I wrote 14 years ago, is still used in a lot of classrooms today. So I think it's all of that why I chose to use the graphic novel comic book form to tell stories.
I definitely feel like my daughter gravitated to the books that I have because I have a few of them here. I have, let's do it just a plug. So I have Will I See, Sugar Falls, based on residential school story, The Peacemaker. I have The Ballad of Nancy April, and then
Beothuk people, yeah.
Shauna Didithai. I don't know how to pronounce this.
Shauna Dithit,
Shauna Didithai.
yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I just taught in my university, first year university class today. I just taught about the Beothuk people. And I feel like connecting to this book here, none of my students had heard of these people prior to first year university. So I feel like this here is just that connection, right? For the youth. And then the fact that it's in this form of, and colored pictures, actually.
Beautiful colored pictures that, that I didn't draw, but were drawn by very talented people who are far more talented than I am. The Beothuk people, just as an aside, just incidentally, quickly, that's a story everybody should know about,
right?
Because, like all Canadians, settlers came into the east coast of Canada and wiped out an entire people.
Extinction.
They were extinct. They became extinct. And Shauna Dithit was the last surviving Beothuk person. And I actually, the 5th book in the Misawa Saga series, which I'm writing right now, is it based on as well the Beothuk people, because I wanted to bring that story to an even wider audience, so people can know really what happened in this country. To think that like this country is a place where we wiped out an entire people,
a whole nation.
I think sometimes we don't really appreciate the gravity of the actions that have that we've taken as a government, as a country, the impact it's had on people, especially Indigenous people, to the point where we wiped out an entire culture.
One of the things I always say is we are living post-apocalyptic. That is what a lot of people do not understand, because stories like the Beothuk people, and this last remaining Beothuk woman, just tells that story.
Right. Well, Sri Demaline is a dear friend of mine. We often will talk about, and she often says that writing post-apocalyptic like dystopian fiction is easy for us because we've been through it, and it's true. So you have like Wobb's book, Moon of the Crusted Snow. You have the Marrow Thieves. You have, we're really good at writing that kind of stuff because we've been through our apocalypse,
Right.
So,
and so I did also want to touch base on Betty, the Helen Betty Osborne story, a very, very important story. I'm impacted by the issue of MMIWG2S. I lost my mother. Lots of the work that I've done, I feel like even still to this day, people don't know the story of Helen Betty Osborne, who was originally from our community of Norway House Cree Nation. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That was actually the first story I told as a writer. I told it in a graphic novel called The Life of Helen Betty Osborne. That came out in 2007, 2008. That book I self-published with the Helen Betty Osborne Memorial Foundation.
Right.
And so the royalties and proceeds to that book were all donated to put Indigenous students through post-secondary education. So that was the first story I chose to tell. And the reason why is because at that point, and when I started planning that story, 2005, 2006, that was nowhere on the radar for Canadians, that that Indigenous women and girls, were being murdered and going missing,
right,
at the alarming rate that they were. And that was just like the stats that I was looking at back then were from 1980 and onward. I wasn't even looking at Helen Betty Osborne's story that happened in 1971. So, and the numbers that, at the time when this book came out, the numbers I think were around 600 to 700, that they were kind of guessing at had been murdered or had gone missing.
Right.
We know today that number is in the thousands. So, so that like, as someone who has, a Métis wife, and someone who has, Indigenous daughters, that is an issue that is very important to me.
Right.
And even before, before I had, before I had kids, before, I started writing professionally, that was something that I was very concerned about. And so the only thing that I could think to do was to try to raise awareness,
Right.
of what was going on. The starting point is always education and awareness,
Right.
so when people know what's happening, and they learn about what's happening, then it leads to positive action, but they have to learn first. And
Right.
so I remember when this book came out, the life of Helen Biddy Osborne, Murray Sinclair, who's my cousin, he opened up the ceremony, and he talked about the story and about comic books and how important they were. And so it was a great little opening. And then I went up there and talked about, the Helen Biddy Osborne and her story. And I talked about the fact that there are hundreds and hundreds of, Indigenous women and girls who have gone missing and or have been murdered in this country.
Mhm.
And hopefully, like I don't think I'm the one who started any of this out. Like I don't think I'm the one who did, any sort of, I think those works had some sort of an impact, but there's a lot of people who've done a lot of work to raise awareness.
Mhm.
And I think it's a communal effort, and it has to
It
be.
is. Mhm.
So, so I wrote this story, and I didn't think I did quite enough justice to her story. So eventually my publisher and I were able to write it again. And that's the Helen Biddy Osborne story, which is the one you showed there.
Right.
And so that was a book where I wanted to talk more about her life and her aspirations and her dreams,
Right.
because I didn't want her to just only be a victim. I
Right.
wanted her to be, and like she, be who she was, which is a human who had dreams, who had goals,
Right.
who was smart, who was funny, who loved her friends, and I wanted to humanize her,
Right.
and then contrast that to what happened to her and why it
Mhm.
happened, and
Right.
I think when people read that story, they hopefully understand the completely messed up reasons why women and girls who are Indigenous and two-spirited people are going missing and being murdered,
Right.
simply because who they are. And and it's hard to wrap your head around the fact that people would harm others in that way, but it's happening. And
Right.
part of the things that we can do too when we read stories like this is to understand that the things that we think we know, we don't really know. So when I write stories about this, I'll often get emails from people that will say, well, you Native men are hurting your own women, and that's actually patently false. Even though a lot of this violence happens on reserve, the vast majority of that violence is perpetrated by non-Indigenous men.
Right.
So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to educate and raise awareness. And then it's hopefully motivating people to step up and to be allies, and to
Definitely.
and to say that's not acceptable. That's not something that's going to happen in our country anymore.
Right.
And it takes that sort of attitude to change what's happening, because it's
And
still
essentially
happening.
the work of the person who solved her case, essentially, because the people who
Yep.
did murder her were non-Indigenous people, and people
Yeah.
had known for many, many years who it was. And it
Yeah.
took that non-Indigenous RCMP officer to actually break that. We're getting close.
Robert Bronowski. I just want to mention his name is
Shout out.
Robert Bronowski. He was, I was able to write him a note a few years ago, but like he's a hero to me. The
Right.
stuff what he did and the effort he put into it.
Right.
If it wasn't for him, those men would still be
At large.
walking around free. So, and actually a couple of them are. So
Right. Yeah, I mean, lack of justice, we could probably talk all all the show about that. But we are getting close to the end of the first half. What I did want to talk, just kind of wrap things up in regards to education, because I am an educator and I just feel like books like this are can be so utilized in the classroom, and not by just Indigenous educators like myself, but non-Indigenous, like books like this allow people to have that, right? So that they can bring that education and that awareness and bring these books to their classroom, and get students interested in issues like this, or learning our true history of Canada, which I feel, again, you talked about representation. I talk a lot about these, the stereotypical narrations that have been told to us through the Western view. So to have somebody Indigenous like yourself, it's just wonderful. It's just a wonderful addition, especially for educators like us. So I guess maybe I'll say thank you. Thank you for this contribution.
Thank you. But you're a storyteller too, that is doing work. I have a lot of friends who are in the writing community, including B. Mazanier, who wrote April Rain Tree, who are icons, who have started to do this work before I was even writing, professionally. So like there's a lot of people doing this work, and I'm one of many, and it's happening in all forms. It's happening in all genres. It's happening in all across Canada, from coast to coast, that Indigenous artists are finding a platform to tell their stories, and it's making a difference. And so if I can even just be included in that conversation, I think that is really quite an honor. But I don't ever
what
think
a humble
like
man
that,
this man.
I don't think I would ever set myself apart from anybody. Like it is a community.
Right.
And we are storytellers, and because we have that space now, people are seeing that is making a difference in how people are educated and motivated to walk this path with us. So
right. Yeah, well, I'm just so happy to have you on the show here to talk about this, and for other people to learn about what you've done, to learn about some of the names of your books, so that they can go out and they can pick them up, or share them widely with other people. So I am going to sign off for the first episode. So thanks again, David Robertson, for coming and talking to us on Truth Before Reconciliation. This is Tammy Wolf, produced by CKUW 95.9 FM here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Treaty 1 territory. Please come back next time and listen to our second half with David Robertson.
thank you very much.
Hi, you've tuned into Truth Before Reconciliation, produced by CKUW 95.9 FM here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. We're on Treaty 1 territory. I'm Tammy Wolf, and I am back for the second show with author David Robertson. So welcome, David.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thanks so much for coming back for part 2. I know last show we talked a little bit about your journey to becoming an author, as well as some of the books. I'm wanting to switch gears because this humble man, talking about how it takes a community. I want to shout out these awards. So I just recently read about you in the paper, or well, I mean, I guess it's all digital online now. CBC did an interview with you in regards to not one, but 2 awards. I believe you just won. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I always feel a little sheepish talking about stuff like that. And I actually won 4 of them, but like 2 of them I co-won, which I like. I like the fact that I co-won a couple of awards, because I mean, it does speak to what I think a lot about, and that's like we're a community here, and the arts community in Manitoba is very, very close knit, and really, I think as well, like underrated. Like very talented people live in this province.
Absolutely.
In the music scene, the theater scene, the literature scene. We have very talented people. You think about the people who work and live in here, like writers. Kate Vermette, Rosanna Deerchild, Duncan Mercredi, like there's so many of them. And it's a great community here. So recently I did win a few awards at the Manitoba Book Awards. I think if anything else, like it's a recognition of the work that you put into something,
Right.
and the quality of story. There's, and I think as well, like, the fact that 3 of my books were recognized in different categories, was really nice. But again, like, the awards are really about, like, the nominations, and the awards are subjective. So if you have a different jury, a different book's going to win, and
Right.
so some of it is, some of it typically. So some of it is like, luck and timing,
Right.
and getting the right people who, read the works, and the juries work really hard, to choose the winners of these categories. But gosh, there's a lot of books, a lot of good books nominated for the Manitoba Book Awards, and I was lucky to win a few. But like I think that that it means more for me to be nominated, than it does to win, because it is like hard, because there's so many books published every year.
Right. I want to plug those books. So tell us what these books are.
So one of them was one of my first adult books, my first adult literary fiction book, called The Theory of Crows. And The Theory of Crows is just a father-daughter story about a relationship that becomes broken, and then the ways in which these two people try to heal it. And the healing process is the catalyst for that is the death of the father's dad and the daughter's grandfather. And so they return to the land, to bring the grandfather's ashes back to the trap line that he grew up on. And so it becomes more of a journey story, both a personal and physical journey.
Right.
And then the other 2 that were recognized was The Stone Child, which is the third book in the Mississauga Saga series, which is an ongoing fantasy series, that's been pretty popular in Canada the last few years. And then the other book is a graphic novel called Version Control, and it's the second book in a series called The Reckoner Rises. And that story is a story that really is trying to present like a positive, authentically written Indigenous superhero, and also someone who's dealing with a very real problem of mental health. And I wanted to normalize mental health struggles through that story. And so those are the 3 books that were recognized. And then the Manitoba Award was something that was awarded to Indigenous artists. And I was able to share that award with William Dumas and Josh Whitehead, who's a lovely guy. And so that was the other one.
I feel like those stories all sound very relatable. So I haven't actually had a chance to read those books, but definitely that relationship breakdown, and then going to the land. Like as soon as you said going to the land, I'm just like, oh, I love going to the land, whether it's summer, whether it's winter. And then also I'm a bookworm. I'm an academic. I love reading.
The land is the answer to everything. Like
it really is.
I call the last like 6-7 books in my career land-based books. I've really gravitated towards understanding of the importance of protecting the land, and the role it plays in our lives.
Yes.
And it is a part of this path we're walking. It is a part of reconciliation, because
definitely
we also have the relationship between us and the land is also broken.
Right.
As Canadians and as people who live on this planet. And so that also needs some sort of a reckoning or healing. And if you can write books that help motivate children to think about those things, then I think that's really important.
Absolutely. I too, part of my research focused on land-based healing, just because, again, I mentioned like I'm impacted by MMIWG2S, and so I really wanted to take something that has helped me. And that's what I thought about when you're talking about this book, this journey. And I'm just like, oh, it's like a holistic journey, the physical, the mental, the spiritually, the emotional, and this healing, right? That they go to do this with the grandfather to go take these ashes back. Just, it sounds like a beautiful story.
I think so. I mean, like, one of the concepts of the book was this idea of crows and how they can remember faces and pass down that recognition of faces,
right,
intergenerationally.
Yes,
And
I've heard that.
I just that concept is just so beautiful to me, and
Right.
I feel like we live that out too as people, that we remember places that our ancestors grew up in, even though
Without even physically being, I think sometimes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, when I went to the Trapline with my dad, it was the first time I ever
Norway
been
House
there.
for me.
Yeah, no, and me too. So like when I went to Norway House for the first time, I felt familiar with it, and I'd
Me
never
too.
been there before. But then when I went to the Trapline, which is just about 15, 20 miles outside of Norway House, I felt like so calm and
You'd
so
been
at
there.
home there. And I felt like I'd been there before. I felt like I belonged there. I felt like the land was like welcoming me home.
Right.
And so the concept of the crows was trying to embody that feeling of like,
Right.
that like as much as we recognize the land, it also recognizes us, and that
Yes.
symbiotic, like beautiful relationship is
Wonderful.
something that we should really cherish.
I definitely have to have you come into my classroom, I think, sometime. Just your language, and you're talking about symbiotic relationships. Like, this is what I teach in my class. It's just, you're hitting all the points. Sounds good. I'm actually really interested to hear what you're doing next. So you've written, you said 30-ish books. You've just gotten these 2 new awards, or I guess 4 new awards. So where are you headed? Are you working on new books? What's happening?
I do have a bunch of books that I have contracted for, so I'm kind of obligated to write them, but I want to write them too. But
Yeah.
I have books that are in all genres and forms coming up. I have the last couple of books in the Mississauga Saga series, which has been a really fun series to write, and that series is a very thinly thinly hidden story that is really about land protection. That that it's really especially the Barren Grounds, which is the first book. It's really a book that's about land protection and land stewardship. So that's something I wrote strictly for like saying like, hey, we are really messing up here, and we need to do better. So so there's a couple of books left in that series. I have a couple of picture books coming out in the next several years, with Maya McKibben, who I would work with on the song that called them home, and hopefully, I won't say who, but like someone I really love and admire with the last one. And then I have the last 2 graphic novels in this superhero series, The Reckoner Rises. I have a middle grade kind of chapter book about an Indigenous girl who solves mysteries. Nice. I have a hockey book coming out next year about a Cree kid coming down from reserve and playing hockey in the city, and the difficulties of that. And I think that, and I have a couple of adult books coming out the next several years as well, including a memoir about my own struggles with mental health over my lifetime. And so, so I have a lot on my plate, a lot of interests, a lot of things that I feel like I need to say. Again, like when I think of an idea for a book, it's always like, what value does this have for other people? And when I think of, when I'm able to determine that, then I think, okay, then I can move forward with it. And so all of these books hopefully have some sort of intrinsic value for other people, because stories are really about making connections with people, and they're about like how in making those connections we can heal. Stories are very powerful, and I think that they are really the lifeblood of reconciliation. They're the lifeblood of like human connection and relationship. They're just like I think their immeasurable value lies within the stories that we tell each other.
I feel like storytelling just as a whole, right? Because when you tie to like Indigenous people, that's what we've done, right? Since time
Yeah.
immemorial, we talk about generational knowledge, passing of that generational knowledge. And I think that is something that just comes like to us as Indigenous people. We have, and I hear you when you say, oh, I have so many stories to tell, right? Like you have all of these ideas that you feel other people need to hear, right? And that's why I do this show. That's why I have people like you on my show, right? Because your story is just that, right? Is sharing these stories with other people, and having people connect in that way. So I did want to talk, kind of moving more so to reconciliation, and talk a little bit about how this all plays into the ongoing truth telling process, because that's where we're still at, right? In the truth telling phase.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, the first thing we have to recognize is that reconciliation is not a sprint. It's not going to happen overnight. I think that, first of all, like, we've done actually really well, over the last 5, 6, 7 years. The changes that we've made and the things that we're teaching kids and what they're learning, I mean, like, we're way beyond where I thought we would be, and that's good. But we still have a long way to go. And so you're right, like, we're at the front end of it, and that means that, like, as much as we're doing good things, we're also we have a lot to learn. And the more we do things, the more we the more we evolve, we learn from the mistakes that we made, we improve from those learnings, we improve from, like, what we learn from the errors that we make in what we do. And I think those are necessary in the growth that we need to have, and as we move forward together. But it is centered around the embracing of story, the recognition of how stories educate and prepare us to take positive action, and help us to understand why we're taking that action in the first place. My dad used to say that, like, well, my dad said a couple things that resonate with me. One of them was, we don't know where we are unless we know where we've been. So, and that also means that we don't know where we need to go until we know where we are. And so it's all this continuum, and so, like, we have a better idea of where we need to get to, but we need to learn first about where we've been and where we are. And that will help inform us of what we really need to do and where we really need to go, because we understand where we've been.
Right.
And so that was one thing he told me, and that really hit home with me. Another thing that he often told me was that, like, whatever you do, like, for me, it was writing. And he would say, whatever books you write, I always want you to think about how you're helping other people. And so, like for my dad, he said, I don't know if what I've done has made a big difference, because real change takes time. So if I've done things properly, I won't see the fruits of that work until I'm gone. And so we have to have patience with the process, because it is a long-term thing. And when I really understood that was, I did this keynote address to Indigenous teachers last year at the Human Rights Museum in Winnipeg. And I was talking to a room full of Indigenous teachers. My dad worked in Indigenous education. His whole goal was to train teachers to become teachers in their own communities, Indigenous teachers. And after I was done my talk, and I still don't know why people listen to me sometimes, but after I was done my talk, I had so many people come up to me telling me that they were there because of my dad, or my dad had some sort of influence on their career and why they became a teacher. And that showed me exactly what my dad was talking about, because my dad died 4 years ago. And so that was where I thought, I wish that he could see this, but I also thought he saw this coming, and I think that is probably as important,
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think that as well with I mean, I can go on forever about this, but like, with reconciliation, I think we kind of misunderstand the breadth of it,
Right.
so like we often equate reconciliation strictly to residential school history.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
that's always going to be the heart of it. But we have to learn a few things. First of all, is that there's an entire history of systemic racism that is also a part of what we need to learn. So,
And it's still happening today.
it's still happening. The justice system, the healthcare system, the
The child
education
welfare
system,
Yeah.
like foster care system, like all those systems that have been designed to marginalize Indigenous people and communities.
For sure.
Those are things that we need to learn and know about. But the other part of it is that we don't want to just be seen as victims. We don't
Right.
want to be we aren't the subject of our trauma.
Right.
And so if you look at like my catalog of books, what you'll see is that over the last several years, you've seen a shift towards I think like a search for balance. And
Right.
that is like learning about community, culture, resiliency, reclamation,
Right.
language, like those things, those beautiful things are as important as the trauma that we've been through. And sometimes like one stems from the other, like reclamation stems from loss, but like, that's all a part of what we need to do when we talk about reconciliation. And our role in that as Indigenous people is to tell our stories and so people can see those things. One thing I won't do
Right.
is tell somebody what they have to do, because it has to be a personal choice.
Absolutely.
I'm not here to tell you what you have to do. I'm here to tell you what's happened. I'm here to tell you what's happening.
Right.
And hopefully when you learn those things, you also understand that first of all, you have a role in it, and you figure out what that role is.
Right. Beautiful. You're segueing into the last half, or I guess the last the last half of this show, because definitely I can't echo all of that stuff. Like you're talking about historical accounts, you're talking about you can't know where you're going until you know where you've been. Let's put my historian hat on. I've said that many times throughout this. You're talking about this generational knowledge that your dad has passed on to you, and how that legacy, it's a legacy. And that's often associated when we think about the legacy of residential schools, right? And the fact that it is only in residential school that, oftentimes that's what people see. That's all they see. So they don't see this historical account. They don't see this historical account. They don't think about how Helen Biddy Osborne, that's still happening today, right? And so these stories that, you've taken it upon yourself to share these stories, and again, moving people to action. Because to me, that's what I feel like reconciliation really is about, right? And I mean, again, many times on this show, I've said, like, I don't feel like we're in reconciliation now. We can see acts of reconciliation. But I'd love for you to share thoughts on reconciliation.
I don't even think it's like a word we should be using. I think that like it's become a buzzword.
Right.
And when it becomes a buzzword, it loses its meaning.
Right.
But we should be talking about the act, and what the process in the act, I guess.
Right.
And so like the best way and the simplest way that I could describe what I really think reconciliation is a conversation.
Right.
And so what we need to do is understand, first of all, that we don't know somebody unless we really know them.
Right.
And the best way to get to know somebody is to talk to them. And so reconciliation to me and to my father was like what we're doing right now, for example, is we're sitting down, we're talking to each other, and we're getting to know each other a little better. because what we're doing is we're sharing stories and we're listening and we're learning, and when we do that, whether, we're both Cree, but like, if I'm talking to like a
Does that
white
matter?
person.
Just kidding.
Oh yeah, like we had this
Only
joke where
we
I
know.
work my day job, my old day job, I worked for the First Nations Education Resource Center in Manitoba, and I always said that the Cree are all in management, and the Anishinaabe people are all work for us. But no, but so take for example, like if I'm a Cree person and I'm sitting down talking with someone who is who's white. Their ancestry is like European. So
Right.
What we find when we talk with each other is that we have things that we share.
Right.
There are connections that we can make with each other, even though we come from different places. We have different cultures. Right, exactly. So like that's our shared humanity. My dad said, like, at the heart of it, when you sit down with someone, you have to recognize one thing. If you only recognize one thing, and that's we're all people, we're human beings, and in the human condition, there's things that we share and we can relate to and we could connect with,
right?
And maybe there's things beyond that we connect with. Maybe we both have kids in hockey. Maybe we have both suffered through the loss of a parent. Maybe we have both experienced the joy of like having a child. There's things that we can connect with, that we share in being human, but the next step is to understand our differences. And the more we talk with each other, the more we understand the things that just define us from each other. But the cool thing that happens is when we really listen to each other, we really seek to understand, is that we understand those differences and we respect them. And there's a value that I'm sure you're familiar with as a Cree person. My dad used to talk to me about this value, and it's the value of non-interference. And that is, you don't interfere with someone else's life.
Yes.
And so
sometimes self-consequences plays a role too.
Yeah. So
definitely Cree.
Yeah. So like I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. That's none of my business. I can model in how I conduct myself, for other people to see. But I'm not going to tell you how to live your life, as much as I'm not going to tell you how to walk this path of reconciliation.
Right.
All I can do is share stories.
Right.
And and if you're really listening, and if you really are listening with a good heart, then you'll have maybe some sort of an idea of something that you can do. Because the reality is that even though I'm not going to tell you what you have to do, this is not Indigenous history. It's Canadian history in this country. And because you are Canadian, you have some sort of accountability to what's happened in this country historically and what's happening here today.
If you're still here.
Exactly. So if you have that accountability, you have some kind of responsibility to do something, It might be this small thing, but the smallest thing can lead to the biggest change,
Absolutely.
Especially when we're all doing it together.
One person at a time. That's the one thing that I always say. I feel like we're at the end here, but it's funny because I swear you're ahead of me. You're just ahead of me. Usually I end the show with suggestions, and you're saying, I'm not going to tell anybody what they need to do. But I do end my show with suggestions. Suggestions for people who want to get involved in reconciliation, or potentially if they want to follow in your footsteps, to become a storyteller, to become an author. What would you suggest for people out there who want to get involved?
I think the starting point is always to learn. You really have to take the time to learn, and it's a worthwhile pursuit. So
Start with these books.
I mean, sure. Like, I think that one of the things I've done in the past is put together lists of books by Indigenous writers that everybody should read.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
like, within the context of reconciliation, within the context of non-Indigenous, Indigenous relations, one of the most important things that you can do to start is to read a lot. to learn a lot, and then once you've done that, then I think you're more prepared and more knowledgeable to do something and know what to do. And so but I think the starting point is always going to be education. Jody Wilson-Raybould in her book, like she kind of puts together this like continuum and this process. And what I've understand that process to be is you learn to understand. And I would add, in doing that, you generate some kind of empathy, and then all of that leads to action, and action leads to change, and so that's what, to me, that's what it looks like. It's not rocket science.
Right.
It's hard to do, but like what we have to do at its heart is very simple.
Right.
Doesn't make it easy, but it's simple, right?
For sure. I can't thank you enough for being here and for giving me the opportunity to spread this beautiful message, because that really is, it's not rocket science. You heard it here with David Robertson. Just to get out there and take action. And and if you can, let's plug a few of your books. Where can people pick these up? I don't think that we've done that yet. So maybe you can plug your books, let people know where they can pick them up. For those of the listeners who are interested in reading some of these great graphic novels or some of the new ones that you have coming out.
You could just go to like any bookstore and just like search up my name, ask for someone to kind of guide you to where my books are. But I think my books are in most bookstores that you can go to. If you want to, give Jeff Bezos a bit more money, you can go to Amazon.
Nice.
I would always though, stop by an indie bookstore,
right.
And if not, then a physical bookstore. Like I think Indigo has been really nice to me over the years.
Nice.
But like you can go and search my name up in most of these places and find a lot of my books. So it's also very simple to find a couple of works of mine. Google
works wonders. I know every guest I have on there, like just Google it. Is there another way for people who are interested, if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, you can always follow me on Twitter. It's just like Dave Alex Roberts on Twitter, or on Instagram. It's just David Robertson Writer. And so it's really easy to find. You can even just search my name plus Twitter, search my name plus Instagram, and I think you'll find them pretty quick. Those are where I'm most active. Nice. I probably am not as active as I should be, but I try to get on there at least once in a while. So you can, and I'm very good at like getting back to people and responding. So definitely get up on there and just like even just say hi, and I'll say hi back. So.
Nice. Okay. Final thoughts.
Oh, no, just like, thanks for having me on. I think it's like, again, like this, I think in a way, like demonstrably, this is like what people have to do, they just like have to chat with each other for a bit, and I feel like I know you a little bit better. You probably feel like you know me a little bit better.
I do.
We made connections through talking. Like we both, we both found out we're both from Norway House, and we're probably cousins. So probably. I think that, so I think that like that's what I would say is like, don't overcomplicate things, like seek to understand, learn as much as you can. And I think be in the business of building community. And I think if we do those things, I think we'll be in pretty good shape. Perfect
ending words. That's what we do here on Truth Before Reconciliation, building relationships and teaching truth before reconciliation. So thank you so much, David, for coming and sharing your wonderful work, as well as your beautiful messages. So thanks so much again, David Robertson.
No, thank you, Echo Zanny. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in as well. Please come see us again. This is Truth Before Reconciliation with Tammy Wolf, produced by CKUW 95.9 FM here in Winnipeg, Manitoba on Treaty 1 territory. We will be back again with a next great, awesome guest. So please continue to tune in.